Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're deconstructing the art of storytelling in adventure games. We're going to dive into the blueprint that designers use to build those compelling, interactive narratives, from the core story all the way to the puzzles that get you scratching your head. Let's figure out what makes these games just so captivating.
All right, here's what we're going to cover. We'll kick things off with the absolute heart of the story, what we call dramatic tension. Then, we'll walk through the classic heroic quest structure. Get into that tricky design debate about player death, break down the puzzles that make up the gameplay, and wrap up with the characters that bring these worlds to life.
So first up, the soul of the story. See, at the very center of any great adventure game, there's this force that just pulls you through the entire experience. That force is dramatic tension, and it's the engine that keeps you hooked from the very first scene all the way to the end credits.
So what is it, really? Well, it's basically a core unanswered question. The game throws a problem at you, and you, as the player, feel this powerful need to see it through to the end. Take a classic like The Longest Journey. It starts with the hero, April Ryan, having these bizarre, intense nightmares. The initial tension, the thing that pulls you in, is just finding out why this is happening to her. But what's really fascinating is how designers go about creating this tension. They follow one of the oldest rules in all of creative writing. Show, don't tell. It's one thing to say a situation is tense. It's another thing entirely to make the player actually feel it in their gut.
So instead of a character just saying, "Wow, this place is scary," the game will use unsettling music, maybe a really dark and constrained color palette, some ominous architecture. These are the tools that build that mood and crank up the tension organically, without needing a single line of dialogue.
And this tension isn't just a flat line, right? It's not always at an 11. It's designed to be a series of peaks and valleys. You get a small problem, like a locked door. You solve it, and you get that little hit of satisfaction. That's a minor climax. But solving that puzzle often reveals an even bigger problem, pushing the tension right back up as you build, step by step, towards the game's one final major climax.
Now let's move on to our second part. If dramatic tension is the engine, then you can think of the heroic quest as the chassis that it's all built on. This is the narrative framework for so many adventure games, and it's a structure I guarantee you'll recognize.
I mean, the vast majority of adventure games really are built on this model. You have a single hero who leaves their normal, everyday world to go accomplish something huge, and that journey almost always takes them from a place of safety into a world that's totally unfamiliar and increasingly dangerous. Now this is a crucial point. The momentum has to keep building. The biggest, most dramatic showdown in the game has to be the last one. I mean, think about it. If you defeat the main villain, the Supreme Lord of Terror, it's going to feel totally lame to then have to fight his less powerful lieutenant. The challenge has to constantly escalate.
But a story that's just non-stop danger, well, that gets exhausting, and it doesn't feel real. And this is where we see this key principle of pacing, something you see from writers like Tolkien. Good stories give you quiet moments, right? Periods of safety where the hero, and by extension, you, the player, can take a breath and process everything before the next big challenge hits.
This brings us to Section 3, at a really interesting debate in game design. The problem of death. Should you be able to kill the player's character? What's the real consequence for failure in an adventure game?
See, in an action game, dying is just part of the loop. You expect it. But adventure games are different. They encourage you to be slow, to explore, to poke around and try stuff. So if you suddenly die just because you opened the wrong door, it can feel really cheap and honestly just super frustrating.
So the modern approach to this is way more player-friendly. First, you give a fair warning. If there's a dragon in the cave, you put a bunch of bones and scorched armor out front. Simple. Second, you use an invisible autosave. This is huge. It means even if the player does fail, they don't lose tons of progress, and, crucially, they aren't yanked out of the story by having to constantly go into a menu and manually save.
All right, let's move on to our fourth section, puzzles and challenges. We've talked about the story and the stakes, but how do you actually interact with it all? In adventure games, the answer is almost always puzzles.
The real heart of an adventure game isn't about fast reflexes. It's about creative problem solving. It's about looking at the tools you have, looking at the problem, and using some lateral thinking outside the box to come up with a solution that the designer cleverly planned for.
And these puzzles show up in a lot of classic forms. You've got your metaphorical locked door, where anything that's blocking you is the lock, and whatever gets rid of it is the key. You've got mysterious machines to figure out.
dialogue puzzles where you have to sweet-talk an NPC, and yeah, the occasional maze, though designers are usually warned to use those very, very sparingly.
And that leads us to our final section, characters and conversation. Let's look at what makes a game world feel truly alive, and, just as important, what helps the player navigate all its complexities.
You know, creating believable characters has always been a massive challenge. Early text adventures tried to use these parsers where you could type sentences, but they almost never worked. You'd get these bizarre answers that made the characters seem, as one designer put it, drugged or mentally ill. That's what led us to the modern standard, the scripted conversation menu, which gives you clear, reliable options.
And to keep you from getting lost, because, let's be honest, that's just tedious, not fun, designers give you maps. The best way to do this is auto-mapping, where the map just fills itself in as you discover new places. This keeps you oriented without completely shattering your immersion by making you pull out a piece of graph paper.
And here is another brilliant tool, the automatic journal. As you find clues and hit key plot points, the game logs them for you. It's an amazing reference for sure, but it's also a great storytelling device. The way your character writes about what's happening can actually help define their personality, which makes it absolutely perfect for detective games.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? Well, for decades, adventure games have been about puzzles of things, of objects, keys, and machines, but maybe the most exciting frontier for the whole genre is shifting that focus. What if the main challenge wasn't about using a rubber chicken with a pulley, but about understanding and influencing complex people? That one question could really change the entire future of interactive storytelling.